I'm not going to make that mistake twice. Last time I was live, I was muted for about 3 minutes. And folks, tonight I have a very special guest. Gene, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Oh, I am so good. Tonight we're going to be talking storm structure. I've got 11. Uh-oh, Gene's having an earthquake.
My tablet just fell over.
Yeah, I've got 11 slides we're going to go through tonight, pictures I took. Basically, there's a lot of different storm structures we're going to look at tonight. Me and Gene are going to talk about it a little bit, and we're just going to use this opportunity to teach. According to the poll tonight, we have about 60% intermediate, 30% beginners, something like that on both platforms, it looks like. So we've got a few experts in the room as well. So I hope we aren't saying anything wrong because that could get us in trouble. But we'll do our best to be accurate tonight. And first off, Gene, where are you checking in from tonight?
Western Kansas.
So nice. Western Kansas is a beautiful place to storm chase, to be sure. So here, let me throw up. We're just gonna get right into this because I don't want this to take like 3 hours. So I'm gonna start off. First slide here. This is the Mobile, Texas supercell from 2018. Just an absolutely fantastic storm to storm chase. This thing had really epic structure throughout its whole life cycle. And just want to talk about a couple of things on this that you may or may not notice. First off, this is a supercell. How do you know it's a supercell? Gene, how do you know this is a supercell?
Well, by the structure, it has a rounded shape. There are some layers. And if it was live, you would also see motion in the direction of the arrows that Rachel has drawn there. It's rather slow, but if you stand and watch it, you can actually see the rotation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to change the color of those arrows, actually. Just so you know, one plug before we get too far into this tonight, I do want to point out that if you are watching this right now, go to the pinned comment on YouTube or on Facebook and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Definitely want to have you subscribe to that because everything I'm working on tonight and myself and Gene are working on tonight will be in your inbox tomorrow morning. So, and it's Renzo asks, do we even look at the live chat? I look at the live chat. I'm trying my best to pay attention to both things right now. So here, let me label this. Gene is absolutely right about that. I'm going to move this up here, and I set this up on purpose. Broad rotation in the updraft is one thing you'll see. Something else I want to point out actually on this is something you'll see a lot when there is really good wind shear, when there is really good instability, is you have this area right here, the edge of the updraft and the edge of the downdraft, and that is known as the vault. If you are lucky or unlucky enough to be sitting there during a storm chase, you'll have a fantastic structure view. But as Jason Castor once did to Eugene, you will also be encountering some gigantic hell in that area, probably right now as we speak. Would not be good. So, Gene, what about the low levels? What are you seeing in the low levels of this storm?
Well, I see that the storm is pulling in a lot of air. You have an area that's lowered and looks like out of that lowered area an attempt at developing a wall cloud. Again, you would need to see it live to know if that very low-hanging formation is actually rotating or not. I assumed by looking at it that it is, but not always. Just because something looks slow and scary doesn't mean that it's rotating. But in this case, all the visual indicators, even though this is a still, would be that very low area is actually rotating.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff there, Joe, on that. We'll make that full screen. You're absolutely right. Something I want to share that because this was a storm I was on. Gene, you didn't chase this one, did you?
Where was this at?
Mobile, Texas, May 29th.
Mobile? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think you were on this one. What was happening here in the early stages is that you can kind of see it happening here in the picture. You can see this downdraft here doing this, and then there's just the ever so slight, you just paying very little attention to it. But here, let me go up here, turn this on white so we can show this. But there's this little slant to that wall cloud right there. And that is because the downdraft here was actually kind of overwhelming the area of rotation. There was a lot of outflow. It was eating into the lowering is how I'm going to call this right here. And that was it kept the storm from really ramping up for about the next 30 minutes or so until this got into balance a little bit better. And you can see something here I want to point out on the back side of this storm. Actually, here, let's go back up here and change the color really quick. You can see back here, these rain curtains were wrapping around. Let's try that again with an actual end to it. I'll see if that works this time. So yeah, this certainly, and yeah, maybe that'll work, maybe it won't. We'll find out. So right there, this is the RFD actually back there. And those wrapping rain curtains, anytime you see them on the back side of the updraft, that would be the RFD.
This is what we would call wet RFD because it has rain in it. Sometimes RFD is dry.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, hey, welcome Nancy from Sulphur Springs, Texas. Just want to welcome you to the stream. And so a couple of things that you want to look for when you're looking at this storm visually. Like what are you looking for trends? First off, that lowering. You see how it slanted a little out away from the downdraft there. You could kind of see all that happening in real time. This is something that you want to pay attention to. Lowerings that are going to produce a tornado are going to be persistent. They're going to be low hanging, and they're going to be increasing with rotation with time. And this was like, it was just there. It was rotating, but not much just yet. So like the threat of the tornado wasn't there, but all the pieces were in place right there. So, Gene, someone was saying you got the background music going.
Oh, I thought I muted it. I did. I must have hit the button twice. There we go.
That's funny. Yeah, well, thank you for that. I'm going to highlight you there, blue text for that. So yeah, this was certainly a storm that was very powerful. It was ramping up, and this storm did produce a tornado about 30, 40 minutes after this. This was on its way to producing a tornado at this point, and then this was looking west. So let's go to the next slide. Here, let me save this so we do not lose it, because that would be a shame if we lost our progress tonight. So the next storm I'm going to look at, this is Buffalo, Oklahoma on May 28th, 2013. Most great storm chasers were up in Kansas that day enjoying the Bennington tornado. I had obligations that day, so unfortunately I was south, and what I got to see was an absolutely interesting looking set of storms. This was I'm going to set the stage for this one. Let's take a look here. I got to see which image I'm throwing. Okay, so this is what the storm looked like just prior to this picture. This is what everything looked like. And you can see here that this thing had traditional supercell shape. This is what it looked like before. It was moving north, had that nice look there, nice little hook echo, definitely cyclonic, rotating, that sort of thing. But what happened with with this storm as it went north is it basically ran into a bunch of other storms, and it stalled. And it was this is probably one of the last times I've ever seen this. This storm moved north into this line of storms, and this is about when this picture was taken. And this storm stalled, and then it came back south. So let's take a look at what's happening in this picture. So the first thing you're going to notice we talk about updrafts and downdrafts. Updrafts are where the storm's breathing in, growing high, and what you're looking at right here is the base of an updraft right here. It's an updraft base. And then you look and oops, let's see if I can do that without causing all sorts of problems there. This is always something you do when you try to do something later, but there's also an updraft base back there in the background as well. So there's multiple updrafts going on here. Another thing you're going to notice back here in the background is the downdraft. So that's core, and it's very big, it's very thick, it's very dense. And this is a great question. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. Renzo, I'm actually using Affinity Designer for this. So not getting paid by them, but I just recently downloaded all the version 2s of their apps, and I've been enjoying them immensely. So we're looking northwest here, and we got a couple of updraft bases. We got a downdraft / core. We just had a supercell start merging into this. Something that I want to push in this class tonight is that just because you have a rain-free base doesn't mean you have a supercell. Gene's seen it 100 times. Every storm has a rain-free base at the start. Gene,
even a pulse storm will for a while.
Yeah, I mean, every single storm has a rain-free base at some point. Something I see beginning storm spotters do a lot, actually, is they'll mention that there's a developing supercell early in a storm's life cycle when it's just like a rain-free base, barely a radar blip. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes this thing's growing right into like multi-cell cluster. So I just want to point that out as something very important here, because from this view, it's really hard to tell. Like, is this a supercell? Is this whole storm rotating? Well, from our view here, there's no real way to know. So that's why we would actually, when you're in the field, you would bring in a little bit of help here, and you would look at what's going on, and you would kind of make some determinations about it right there. Like the velocity is really terrible here. There's nothing really of note, and this has just become a big cluster. So what we're looking at here, in my opinion, is that we have storms that are merging together. And, let me label this really quick. Are in the process of merging. And what's happening when this happens or what happens when updrafts merge like this, and you got a bunch of updrafts in one spot, you have this really big tendency for outflow. Like, storms love to get together and blow out cold air. That's like their favorite thing in the world to do, actually. Most storms end up doing this at some point in their life cycle. So when you're looking at a situation like this and you see rain-free bases and a core, it does, just because there's no shelf cloud doesn't mean there's not outflow at this point. So Renzo actually has a couple of questions. Renzo, feel free to ask those in the chat. We'll get to them as we talk. Gene, what else are you seeing here?
Well, I would just confirm the outflow because you can see there's a slight indication in the in the downdraft in the back there in the rain core that wind is pushing it out.
Yeah, you're seeing a little bit of slope there, actually.
Yeah, and even further back, it's the slope heading from the base down towards that grain elevator. There's an area that's darker.
Yep.
So there's already a pretty strong outflow from this storm. The other thing is, you could surmise that this has a little bit of rotation just by the shape of the cloud, but not necessarily. This is one of those that can easily fool you because you see those curving features on the cloud, and that could just simply be the storm being pushed out as it's propagating forward. It isn't necessarily rotation. You see what I'm talking about there, Rachel, on the structure of the updraft?
Yeah.
There's a curved feature there, but that does not necessarily mean there's rotation. It might.
I'm going to put organized rotation because what happens with these outflow storms oftentimes, if you are a beginner storm chaser and storm spotter, is that, and those are terrible. We'll fix those later. But what happens with outflow storms is there's a lot of rotation in them. There's a lot of like motion. It doesn't mean that this rotation is persistent and getting stronger. Like when you're looking for tornadoes, that's what you're looking for. Outflow is very chaotic. That's by its very nature, it's chaotic. So yeah, when you're looking at a storm, this story of this slide is just because there's a rain-free base does not mean we have a supercell. That's something that beginners mistake all the time. So in this case, there was a supercell-ish, multi-cell-ish. I mean, it was kind of this nice fine hybrid, a little bit of a complicated scenario, but I just wanted to bring this one to you because it was a little bit of an interesting scenario. And I'll try to put on the first radar image I used there as well. So this one, we're out there in Gene's backyard, out there by Meade, Kansas, on this one, June 1st, 2014. Well, Gene, there's a rain-free base. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's an advancing line is what it looks like to me.
That's why Gene is the expert. He is the expert, and he sees that immediately. Whenever you do this long enough and you see enough storms, you have a really good feel for like what a supercell looks like, what a linear complex looks like, etc. Because there's a couple of things here that this looks interesting. Let me point this out right here. I'm going to try. Oops, I am writing B's all over the place, and I am not actually putting what I want to put there. So what I want to point out is there's some striations. There's some inflow features. This is looking interesting. I mean, this has a lot of interesting features that would say, hey, this is rotating. Right? This could be rotate. Oh, inflow rotations, inflow features. See, this is what happens when you try to type and talk at the same time. I can't do both at once. But Gene's right. Let's pull up the radar image for what's happening here, because I think that'll make things really clear. Yeah, there we go. And that is your radar image. That's what we're dealing with. This is actually the beginnings of a broken line of storms. And this is Radar Scope, the app, by the way. So this is a broken line of storms that is just taking shape. This is the very beginning of a linear complex. I'm going to shrink that. Another thing I actually want to point out that I think is important to note on these storms too is like if you're just looking at a storm visually, one thing that's going to be a great tell about what the environment is that right there. Just look how high that cloud base is. It's a very high cloud base. Anytime you have a high cloud base, they mean more outflow. Almost always. Just that momentum that's created aloft that just slams downwards, that's outflow. I mean, you're just going to get a lot of outflow with these. So that's why, amongst other reasons, why higher base storms have a hard time producing tornadoes. So that's something that you'll find oftentimes. This was during June, so this is a later portion of the season, to be sure. Something I also want to point out, this is going to start getting crowded here, and I apologize for this, but I'm going to do it anyways. Right here, you go across, you can just kind of trace this. It's kind of a horseshoe shape. Whenever you're looking at an updraft and you're looking at like kind of a horseshoe shape, and let me kind of bring that down so I can label this a little bit better. So a horseshoe shape typically means, Gene, correct me if I'm wrong. Am I wrong on this? It means outflow typically. Like I can't remember too many horseshoe shapes that are like, oh yeah, this is definitely inflow dominant.
Yeah, it basically means outflow. Now there are some rare cases where you develop some circulations in that outflow that can produce what is called a QLCS tornado. But that, well, I suppose we're finding out that's more common than we realize, but it's not something you typically want to chase. so that can happen. But basically, that horseshoe shape, or if it's really well developed, a backward C even
Yep.
means strong outflow.
Absolutely. Means strong outflow to be sure. Gene, what are a couple of things that you look at to kind of like visually, what are you looking at to kind of say inflow, outflow? Like how is this storm dominant one way or the other? What are some of the things you're looking for?
Oh, you look at what's happening at both cloud level and ground level. Look at what the precipitation is doing as it's coming out of the storm. You can see, if you watch carefully, if precipitation or dust is being pulled into the storm versus it's being pushed out. A real tell in the precipitation shaft that it's outflow dominant is what's called a rain foot. You see a little bit of that on this precipitation shaft here on the right hand side, where near the ground the rain extends out. Sometimes it's so strong that there's actually a little bit of a curlicue in that rain foot. Especially this year, as dry as it's been in western Kansas, a real tell for an outflow dominant storm was blowing dust. Lots of blowing dust.
Yeah, and something people will mistake a lot, and when you're looking at storms visually, a lot of people these days are very much like they see blowing dust, and their first instinct is to scream tornado. Context clues. I got a video coming out about this in a couple of weeks, actually. Oops. Yeah, labeling that rain foot there. I've got a video coming out in a couple of weeks about this, about looking for context clues. Like in a situation like this, you see blowing dust. Almost always, this thing is not a tornado. Like, this is blowing dust. This is outflow, pushing out away from this storm. So that's something to keep in mind. Just because you see blowing dust, just because it's rotating, does not mean it's a tornado. So before we get to this next one, actually, let's do this one. Then I'm going to show a couple of videos because I want to introduce a couple of basic concepts to folks who are very beginners, for sure. So, Gene, we're looking northwest. We're in Ringling, Oklahoma. We were on this storm together, actually. I know for a fact it was me, you, and Jason on this storm.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at here, Gene? Because people will see this and think that, this is obviously a pretty strong edit of this, but you see these kind of skies, very chaotic, very intense. People scream tornado. Gene, tell people why they should not panic when they see this, at least completely.
Well, it's a feature called a whale's mouth, and what it is the updraft area of the storm is being eroded by cold outflow below, and then you get that sort of mottled appearance. It may be something that you need to do a heads up about because it may mean that you've got some really strong winds coming in.
Exactly.
But cold, dry air is eroding the inflow and the clouds that are condensing in the inflow, and then you get that sort of mottled feature there.
Absolutely. Here, I'm writing this right here. This is actually the shelf cloud up in the top right. That's the shelf cloud that was passing over us at this time. And then, so basically what Gene's talking about with that cold outflow air just like pushing out here. Let me make this blue because it's cold. I need to make it blue. This air is just blowing out like this. And it is just like, I'm just going to make two right there. This cold outflow is eating into the updraft, that cool, moist air. Yes, exactly. Renzo has asked a question. Let's bring that. Why it looks unorganized. So yeah. And we'll get to one here with Chuck in a second. But yeah, this is why the shelf cloud looks unorganized, because there's basically a lot of chaotic motion. There's a lot of things happening. You'll often see rolling motion. I'm rolling as if I'm on camera right now. Rolling motion like this. that basically signifies that where that cold air is coming out and that warm air is coming in, and it's just kind of rolling like this. You see that rolling action along shelf clouds all the time. With something like this, you're seeing the cold air rush out of the storm. So this shelf cloud would pass, and you would suddenly feel this burst of like cool air. You'd go from like 85 to 65 really quickly, or colder. If you're on the high plains, it's really cold. You can get into the upper 40s pretty easy, even into May and June. It can get really cold. Pack a hoodie if you're chasing out there. So that's basically what's going on here. And Chuck has a great question, Gene. Said, I thought the horseshoe-shaped updraft is caused by the RFD and itself doesn't necessarily indicate that the storm is outflow dominant. You're right, Chuck. That's the exception to the rule, but it's still technically outflow causing the horseshoe shape, just on a smaller scale as the storm is actually wrapping in inflow as well. So, and that same dynamic actually is something that you see play out with the QLCS too, where you have a strong push of outflow that kind of pushes the storm out, and then you have the inflow coming in. You get those mesovortices form really quick, but the supercell is more organized, long-lasting, and persistent. So technically, the horseshoe shape is a sign of outflow pushing up and around the meso, but it's also like there's actually sustained inflow also happening with the storm. If the whole storm is horseshoe shaped, like just big horseshoe shape, that's a sign that the whole storm's pretty outflow dominant, especially if the downdraft is back behind it. So like here, let me throw this back to this slide. So basically, so I'm going to take this comment off. So you can see like the whole storm is right there. It's just like it's a big horseshoe, and then the downdraft's back behind it. That's when you know that downdraft's likely pushing that storm out and causing that horseshoe shape. So it's a small visual indicator you can look for to see if a storm is like outflow dominant from the get-go, because this one was outflow dominant from the get-go. And this one actually, Gene, if I'm not mistaken, this one started as a supercell that was like really low based, and like, wasn't it like the warm front supercell there by Snyder or something? It was really low based, and then it just like congealed with a bunch of other storms and pushed east. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that's that one. In its early stages, it had some pretty decent supercell structure. And I think I have a shot in my file of photographs of just a really, really concentrated hail shaft coming off the side of it. If I remember that storm, and then it congealed and went outflow dominant. I think you and I, and also Jason, got some really good pictures in that one town of the shelf cloud as it had passed through the town and was actually east of us.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that was in Hilton, actually. We're talking about my hometown area. I'm from Velma, Oklahoma, and Ringling, Hilton, Velma, all right there in a little area. So I was basically hometown chasing at this point, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, this is a very typical linear storm look. And Renzo asked a great question. Does an outflow dominant storm kill the rotation? Typically, yes. Gene can correct me if I'm wrong, but typically, yes, because that outflow is overwhelming the inflow. And you typically, when a storm becomes really outflow dominant, it's going to push out a lot of outflow, and it's going to end up becoming shelfy like this. You're going to see this shelf cloud here. I'm actually going to label one more thing here. Let's actually make this.
Well, while you're labeling that, I think maybe add a modifier to that. It kills the low level rotation. The storm may continue to rotate at mid and upper levels, but it kills the low level, which means the tornado threat is basically nil.
Yeah, exactly. And the low levels are so important. We're constantly learning more and more about this, but I'm going to put this right here: warm, moist air flowing up and over shelf. So, and that's why you get the rolling motion. And I'll label that actually before I send it out, the rolling motion actually, so you can kind of remember that. So if you are a beginner to storms and weather and such, you're going to hear us talk about a couple of different terms a lot. And I want to take a little bit. Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for jumping in, Kristen. Can't wait for you to watch this on replay. I want to take a minute for me to show a couple of videos from Titan U. If you haven't ever checked out Titan U on our website, tornadotitans.com, there's a ton of great material on there. And I want to talk about instability and wind shear. I want to explain both of them very clearly. These are a couple of videos, so I'm going to play them. And when they're done, myself and Gene will come back and we're going to roll through a couple more supercells. Maybe if it'll work. I see the game we're playing tonight. So let me queue up. We're going to do instability.
When discussing severe weather setups in the spring, we often take for granted when we mention the words instability, lift, and wind shear. It's as if we expect people hearing those terms to know exactly what we mean. So today, we're going to take a look at one part of that combo and answer the question, what exactly is instability? The answer to that question could actually get quite complex, but we are going to stick to a narrower definition that'll help explain why instability is important for thunderstorms to form. To answer this question, I need you to think of the atmosphere as something that's dynamic, fluid, and ever-changing. Can we agree to do that? Okay then. The atmosphere tends to naturally cool slowly with height. So, the further up and away from the surface you are, the cooler the air is. Using this hugely scientific phrase, warm air rises, you'd think that because the atmosphere naturally cools with height, air from the surface would always be rising. But that's not always the case. As the air rises from the surface, it too cools as it goes upwards. As the air rises and cools, if it encounters air as warm or warmer above it, it quits rising. If this happens and air is failing to rise, the atmosphere is considered stable. What has to happen for the atmosphere to become unstable is the air at the surface has to become both warm and moist, while the air above the surface also has to cool. Usually, air heating up simply happens thanks to a warm, sunny day occurring. And why does air need to be moist, you ask? A piece of air with more moisture within it cools less as it rises versus a drier piece of air. So, the atmosphere is potentially more unstable in a warm and moist atmosphere than a hot and dry one, because the air cools slower and can rise further up when it's more moist. As this warm and moist air rises from the surface, if it finds the atmosphere above the surface is cooling as well, then the atmosphere has become unstable. Unstable air is when the atmosphere is cooler above than it is below. By its very definition, that means the air is unstable and prone to big changes. When this happens, the warm and moist air at the surface lifts in the air which is cooler than it is. Because of this, our air rising is buoyant, or it can continue to move upwards. Buoyant air will rise until it reaches a level of equilibrium, or stability, with the air around it. As that warm and moist air rises, it eventually will form into clouds and continue to rise. It's at that point we see the atmosphere give birth to a thunderstorm. Today's video topic is wind shear. You often hear the words instability, wind shear, and lift during severe storm season. And if you're like a lot of the people I talk to, you may not actually know what those things are. So, what is wind shear? Wind shear refers to a change in wind speed or direction with height in the atmosphere. It's not an advanced way to cut your hair. Sorry. Wind shear is an essential ingredient for supercell thunderstorms to form during the spring storm season. Wind shear also contributes to severe weather and non-supercell storms as well. The two types of wind shear we're going to spend a bit of time talking about today are speed shear and directional shear. These are exactly what they sound like. Hey, sometimes this weather stuff is actually somewhat straightforward. But let's start with speed shear. Speed shear is important for storms sustaining themselves for a long time and will also determine the speed at which storms might move. What we look for with thunderstorms is winds which increase with speed with height. Why is that, you ask? Because these gradually stronger winds as you go up will allow for a storm's updraft to tilt over. which then puts the rain and hail away from the updraft. The updraft of a storm is a pretty sensitive process, not unlike Brandon Goforth's emotions, and rain falling back through it will weaken the storm overall. When winds are stronger above than they are below, storms will tend to rain well away from the updraft. This process of venting allows for the downdraft to reinforce the updraft, which could help sustain supercell storms for hours at a time. Directional wind shear, on the other hand, is the change in wind direction with height. This impacts a storm's ability to rotate faster to produce tornadoes. Ultimately, you want 90 degrees or so of gradual turning of winds with height from the surface to the storm's mid-levels for the ideal tornado environment. The exact relationship here is way more complex than that, but we only have a couple of minutes here. Directional shear in the lower levels is extremely important for tornado formation. The exact reasons are not fully understood, but this shear does increase the spin in the atmosphere, which contributes to the development of a tornado. An ideal environment for supercell thunderstorms, the biggest and baddest storms on the planet, consist of strong winds at the surface, gradually increasing and turning with height. For us as storm chasers, strong surface winds of south or southeast, turning to even stronger west or southwest or west winds aloft, is a signal that an environment is ripe for supercell formation if instability and lift are also present.
So I just wanted to just bring those for the folks who are newer. And when we start talking about things like wind shear and instability, and you're wondering what's going on, that's two very basic introductions to the concepts, because I think it's very important for folks to understand the basics of what we talk about. Because when it comes to supercells, multicells, pulse storms, tornadoes, it all starts with lift, instability, and wind shear. I didn't do lift today, but we'll do lift on another class for sure at some point. So, Gene, I say, let's get back to the storms. And Anita brings this up. I could cheerfully chase for years without a tornado. For me, it's all about the structure. There are so many people who agree with you, Anita. If a tornado happens, I want to be there. I want to be close to it. Just, and close enough, like I don't want to be right up next to it. I want to be at a distance. I can put a camera on a tripod and film it, show what's going on. But hey, if I see something like this right here, that's on the screen right now, the day was awesome. This was a great storm chase day. So this is a great question also from Renzo. On how a storm falls over. Does it have anything to do with a storm getting sheared off? Gene, what happens when a storm falls over? Like what's happening there?
Generally, the shear exceeds the instability. You need a balance for a storm to develop properly, and if the shear, especially the speed shear, is stronger than the instability, then a storm will fall over, and it really just can't get going. The radar echo on that will look very stretched, very narrow, very long and narrow.
Yep. Yeah, you can, that's a whole other class, actually, we need to do at some point, Gene, where you can just look at a radar image and tell what the environment's doing. Like that's a whole other class that we could do easily, show radar images with skew T charts. So I need to quit trying to commit myself to so many videos, honestly. So let's talk about this storm. Gene, what kind of storm are we looking at there?
That's an obvious supercell.
And Gene, what makes it an obvious supercell?
Well, you see the layering in the updraft. You see the rounded nature of the updraft. You see that the precipitation and downdraft is just well displaced from the updraft. You have a vault area between the updraft and the downdraft. You see an element of the precipitation being pulled around the backside by the RFD. Again, if you just stood there and watched this for a while, you would see that that updraft is slowly rotating.
Yep, that's the thing. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this to go all the way. Let's see if I can. No, that's not going to work. I'm going to try this again because, but Gene, you mentioned the one thing I wanted to definitely point out about this is you can just, this was just a really fantastic scene where you can see the downdraft falling, but also being sucked down through the backside of this storm. It was just something else to look at this happening in real time. I don't even know what to say there. Just rain being pulled around updraft. So whenever you see a layered and rounded updraft like this, like the key for supercells, in my opinion, one of the first things I look for is a rounded updraft. I'm looking for something more round that just clearly has that look of rotation. This obviously looks like it. Now, a couple of things that I'm seeing here that I saw when it was happening too. First off, let's just talk about this right here. So there's not really much of a lowering there. Not much. And maybe I can type not much of a lowering. But, and you're just going to have to remember what I said with but. Sometimes tornadoes don't need much of a lowering to happen. That's one thing to point out. Sometimes tornadoes come out of relatively flat, benign-looking bases. But what will happen oftentimes is you can see where my mouse is pointing in there. You'll see rapid rising motion into the updraft even still. That rapid rising motion, and I lied. I'm going to put this in here. Look for rapid rising motion. I see more often than not, and we're just gonna have to make that smaller. That's just crowded. I'm gonna make these a little bit prettier before I send them out, I promise. But yeah, you're looking for rapid rising motion if it's flat. But a couple of things that you can also see, the storm base, actually, it's not terribly high. Gene, would you agree? It's not terribly high base, but it's also like bordering on high base.
Yeah, it's one of those borderline ones. What you would hope for is as more moisture is being pulled in from the backside, that the base might lower some more. But this certainly could produce a tornado. There's no question about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to label something here because you can actually kind of see it. I just want to point this out. Something you're looking at here, you can actually see the rotation visually. Like this is one of those that if you just look at it long enough, even in still, you can see that it just looks like it's rotating. So a couple of things you want to look for. This updraft looks kind of thin. When it's kind of thin, you start wondering. It's a big tip off. Like, is this storm about to die? Is it going to survive? That's something you look at. When it comes to looking at storms visually, storms are going to tell you what they're doing 20, 30 minutes before radar. Gene teaches this to any new chaser. The storm is going to tell you what it's doing well before radar will. Right, Gene?
Yeah. The adage that goes with that is just by looking at a storm, you know what it's doing 10 minutes before the radar tells you.
Yeah, it's just so consistent. Something I'm going to point out here, because when we're talking about visuals, when we're talking about what are we looking at for a storm, is it still powerful? Is it still not? The updraft, you can just barely see it in this picture. This is like a 10-year-old picture. The camera didn't have the greatest dynamic range. This is a miracle that this image ended up looking like this. But you can see over here, the updraft still looks pretty crisp. There's also a slight bit of, you can actually see back here, it's too small to really label because it's just going to get too crowded. But there's actually a bit of a flanking line still falling into this storm a little bit, which is a good sign when it comes to storm strength. And when you're just looking at a storm, it's all about the trends. Is the storm getting smaller? Is the storm getting thinner? Does it, look less defined? Because the storm tower can get smaller and still be very powerful. This was a case of this. This storm at Kingfisher, Oklahoma at this point was producing baseball-sized hail, giant hail at the time this photograph was taken. And Gene, what would you say happened an hour later? What do you think happened with this storm?
Oh my, I'm trying to remember the day. I'm pretty sure I was on it.
I think you were too. That's why
I think an hour later it produced a significant tornado.
You're exactly right. An hour later, it produced a big tornado near Piedmont. This updraft actually did something that was very interesting through its life cycle. This was a situation where a period where it had gotten a little smaller. It was a lot bigger 30 minutes prior, and it got a lot bigger again 30 minutes after this. The storm cycled up and down. Supercells cycle up and down. So it's always a dance with storms because, oh, this storm's getting thinner. It's dying. Well, maybe not. We're going to talk about some visual cues as to whether a storm's dying or not very shortly. A couple of things that would tip me off to whether the storm is dying or not is, are the low levels really smooth? The smoother low levels tend to indicate more stable air, that those air parcels are being pushed, like forced upwards. We're going to show an image here in a second of that. And that would indicate maybe the cap's starting to increase. What time of day is it? How strong is the cap? These are all things like, this isn't a forecasting class, this is a structure class, but you take all that. You take the 360-degree view of a storm day. That's where it pays to not just look at the HRRR and look at a reflectivity map. It pays to know what the cap looks like, what's the observation of the cap, how does the models differ from that. It pays to know like what our dew points are, where they're going, all these things. In this case, dew points actually reached a bit of a minimum at this time during the afternoon, late afternoon, and then they started increasing again, and so did the relative humidity as we went into evening, and bam, this thing just took off, dropped 5-inch hailstones on Piedmont, Oklahoma, as well as like, I think it was an EF2 tornado. Anita asked, this is a good question, Gene. I want you to answer it. How would you classify this supercell? Classic, LP, HP? What are we looking at here?
It's a classic supercell, but it's leaning towards LP.
Yeah.
If it was a fully LP, then you would have almost no precipitation over to the right. But it's certainly, with the very visible vault, it's a classic that leans towards LP. I think it's important to understand that those categories are not hard and fast, and they kind of blend together.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've always called this storm actually a dry classic storm. So it's like LP, dry classic, wet classic, HP. Like it's a spectrum, and they're just like, there's no hard and fast stops, like Gene just said. There's no absolute determinant that this is that or this, and oftentimes people can argue about it. Because one thing that you do see is there is a bit of an RFD. It is not completely dry. So that's something that I think is important to point out. Oh, and I'm following too much. Yes, Anita, you're very welcome. So it's a great question, because this is something that I think, when you're looking for visual cues, I think for an LP, for it to be LP, I would want this precip area over here to be pretty transparent, a lot less defined. And I'd also want to see pretty much a dry RFD, and there are some rain shafts happening. This is pulling that rain around and behind. The storm actually went from this to an HP by the time it produced a tornado. That tornado was pretty rain wrapped by the time it happened. So let's go on to slide 6. So Gene, I know you were on this storm. This was a really interesting storm through its life cycle. I'm sorry, I got really fired up. I should not have drummed there. That people probably got clever or something. But Gene, you just take it away. Explain the day. Explain what we're looking at here.
Oh, well, at this point, it's basically an HP supercell. It started out in the northern Texas Panhandle as rather LP with significant structure, and it kept going well into and after dark. I think its most significant tornado it actually produced after dark. I remember Rachel and I setting up north of Canadian, shooting shooting lightning time lapses off of this. It seems to what's the Lipscomb, near Lipscomb? The storm had some really incredible structure. I've got some pictures from that point, that it had some really incredible structure. It's, I guess I'd have to be honest and say at the point of this picture, it's transitioning from classic to HP. It's not completely HP yet, but it's on its way. Most HPs, you can't see much of the superstructure of the storm. This one you can still see a little bit.
Let me scoot those over because I want to point out something that you can see just barely. Because when you're looking for tornadoes, especially on a storm like this, what you're looking for is an area that's kind of like at the edge of the downdraft here. Let me label the downdraft because that's important to point out. Oops. Maybe if I could actually like copy and paste, maybe, I can master that. Downdraft over here. So if you follow the downdraft and you follow it down where it ends toward the updraft, this isn't a wet RFD, so you gotta look for both ends of it. And here, I'm gonna just kind of label this the downdraft's kind of coming down like this. And then you can see the edge of the updraft is kind of, you can just barely see it, but it looks like something like that. And you're looking, when that happens, you're looking for the interesting area. It's going to be in here somewhere. It's going to be like in that little area between or right where the downdraft and updraft meet is like where you're kind of looking at this point. I'm going to bring that up. And I'm going to get rid of that very briefly so I can show something. But you can kind of see back up in here. It's very hard to see. Let me... I unplugged that. Oh no, I unplugged my controller. But you can kind of see back up in here. You can just see a little bit of a lowering back there, just a little bit. It's just barely visible. So that was happening. This storm was, as Gene said, basically transitioning into an HP storm at this point. A couple of things that are notable, and I think I want to point out because I think it's kind of important to pay attention to. Cloud tags here typically indicates some outflow of some sort. So that would, in this case, indicate that the front flank downdraft of this storm was pretty strong. And it was this, I just got to show you. I'm just going to do it. I can't help myself once I figure out where the radar image is. Here we go. And I just opened up the radar image in another window. I have no idea, folks, why I cannot just click and drag. That's an interesting phenomenon that is happening in my life right now. I'm going to try it. I'm going to just try to put it in the same window. Maybe that'll work. Hey, look, there we go. I'm not a failure anymore. So this is what this storm looked like about this time. By the way, quick plug, we are not sponsored by RadarScope. I don't even want to pretend like we're sponsored by RadarScope. But I do want to say that RadarScope Pro, the Pro version 2, the tier 2, that's $14.99 a month, allows you to access NextRad radar data for any day from any radar site back to 1993, as long as those radar sites were operating. So that's where I pulled all of these from. So I would recommend you check out RadarScope Pro. So at the time of this, you can see here these cloud tags, this thick downdraft, this inflow band. This supercell actually had a separate cell kind of blowing up here in its front flank a little bit. And so this supercell, you can see the cyclonic kind of kidney bean shape. It's definitely transitioning to HP at this time as it's approaching Canadian. I say Miami on here. I need to relabel that. It's actually Canadian at this point, Gene. I don't know my Texas towns at this point, but this is technically Canadian right before it went completely ham with the lightning while we were watching it. So yes, Anita points out she loves RadarScope too. I absolutely agree with that. So what's happening here is that the storm right here in the front flank, it's just kind of blowing up. So it's kind of reinforcing the front flank downdraft here a little bit. And you see the velocity here, not very impressive. And I'm going to shrink that now and move it up here so you can look at it later when you are looking at the full version, because you're totally going to subscribe to the newsletter. And by the way, I'm going to put that link in the chat right now. If you subscribe to our newsletter, you're going to get a link to all of these images you can download and review for the rest of your life if you want. So, and I'll also have the edited versions as well, so you can kind of reference back and forth and kind of make your own decisions on that.
A couple other things there, Rachel, too. One is especially where that inflow band is feeding in and then, flowing around the developing HP there. You have a feature that is commonly called a collar cloud. You see that often, this edge around a very, very heavy precipitation shaft. Then another thing too is above the collar cloud over on the left-hand side, you see something that is characteristic of many supercell thunderstorms, but especially for some reason in the Texas Panhandle, that sort of bell shape to the left-hand side of the updraft there. You see that slope up into it. Sometimes you'll even see classic supercell that is completely bell shaped. You have that kind of shape both on the left and the right hand side, and that seems to be more common in the Texas Panhandle than other places, although it does occur other places too.
Yeah, it really. I wonder, Gene, that might be a thing with instability. I've actually wondered that for years and years and years. Like, why do the bell shapes happen in the Panhandle? But it's just so often that the bell shapes happen in the Panhandle. So yeah, when you're looking at this storm, first off, it's going to be hard to see if you're going to get a tornado is going to be really hard to see. At this point, honestly, given the radar presentation of it, given the fact that it's very disorganized here in the low levels, I wasn't even thinking tornado. I was just like, this thing was punching out incredible structure, incredible lightning. It was just like a heck of a show, actually. So let's go to another slide, because I'm trying to get through as many of these as I can tonight, for sure. So, Gene, were you on the Coldwater Day in 2017?
Yes.
So yeah, you were there. So
yeah.
So this slide, I want to talk about storm trends, looking at them visually and trying to figure out, what is this storm doing? So in this case, Gene, I'm just going to let you take it away again, because I'm finding it way easier to actually label while you talk. So why don't you take it away?
Well, it is. It's a storm that started out as a classic supercell that continued to dry out, and what you see at this point is an LP supercell, more or less, that is continuing to dry out. Again, you've reached the point of the day where you have stable air near the surface. That's often called the boundary layer, so that's why you have that smoothed out or flat bottom. The storm is still rotating. I think at this point it was still producing tennis ball sized hail. But tornado threat was minimal, but it was spinning like crazy, and really pretty in the lowering sun as well.
Yeah, this thing, I'm just going to label up here. Watch for storm trends. So whenever you're looking at trends with storms, like what's happening, you want to pay attention to like what a storm's doing. I labeled here the smoothed out bottom because anytime you see smoothing like that means there's some kind of stability happening. It may not be affecting the storm completely, because I've seen smoothed out bottoms actually still produce tornadoes, but there's something happening there that's causing a little bit more stability than you would have otherwise. Which is, it's basically moisture's being forced upwards, brute forced upwards at that point. You're also seeing, anytime you see these updrafts thin out, and I labeled that right here, This storm went from a lot wider and it's thinning out right now. And another thing that was happening with this storm at this time was quite simply that it was just not looking that great on radar. So it had really just started to show some signs on radar that, oh, we've got ourselves a problem here. Because this storm actually did go tornado warned at one point. I just want to point that out. It was tornado warned about 30, 40 minutes before this. But you see that the storm has this hook echo, but it just immediately kind of like dives south. It's almost like it can't hold up with the wind anymore. So it's just kind of the water in the downdraft just being pushed around up there. So that's usually whenever you see a storm like doing that and starting to tip over, even compared to what it was earlier, that's a sign that it's weakening. The storm on radar would be getting smaller. It's getting smaller visually. So watching for storm trends is very important, watching to see what's happening here. Another thing that I had noticed during this is the updraft was getting much softer. Which is an important thing to point out whenever you're looking at an updraft, because if they're crisp and really, really solid, those updrafts are going to end up, that's a strong updraft. If they go from that to really mushy, something's happening there. There's something making that updraft kind of struggle a little bit. Gene,
and in this case, if you would add on the radar the motion vector, which was largely straight east, a little bit southeast, what was happening was the storm was raining into its own updraft. So you had cool air that was being cooled by the rain was what was actually feeding the updraft, and that was what was causing it to go soft.
Exactly, Gene. Thank you so much. I was hoping you would point that out. So basically, you can see something you can see here, and I'm going to point this out, is it looks a little softer. That's the rain falling. And so basically, at this point, the storm, two things were happening at this point. There was a cap that was increasing rapidly, because this was like a very isolated storm. This was an isolated storm day on the dry line with a very strong cap. So somewhere about in here, there was a cap in place around that layer of the atmosphere. And then also the storm was starting to ingest this really cool air. This really cool air was kind of flowing up and into the updraft. And that was causing the storm to get basically choked off from two angles. From the bottom, the storm was getting like cooler, stable air, not good. That's why you see the smoothed out bottom, because the air was a little bit more stable. Also because of the cap up top, you can actually see where the storm is kind of like, kind of does this, and then it raises, and you see this little curling back action right here, which I should probably layer. That's typically a sign, and from my experience, that there's a little bit of an inversion there of some sort, that the storm just kind of like wraps around it a little bit. That tends to happen a lot whenever you have a really strong inversion happening, because you get these really wildly unbalanced storms at this point. So maybe one of these days I'll learn to type and talk. It's not happened yet. But yeah, let me put this cap increasing. So, and I'm going to have to lower that size down too. Image editing in real time, it's a real treat, I'll tell you. So again, whenever you're looking at storms, this is something to keep in mind. As Gene talked about a little bit ago, whenever you're looking at storms, whenever you're chasing out there, you're looking at storms, or you're looking at them on radar even, but especially when you're looking at them visually, they're going to tell you what they're doing well before the radar tells you. Because this radar image, I'm not even going to try to pull that one up. I was going to try to pull, oh wait, there it is. Never mind. I can do it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, come on. Just want to point this out. This radar image, actually, you can see how it's tilted over here later. This is earlier, and you can see how it looks a little bit more robust. There's a bit of a bigger core there. Let me zoom in a little bit on that. And you can kind of compare and contrast a little bit how they look a little different. So this storm, I mean, it's a very subtle shift from this to this. And this was only over, I think, 30 minutes. So it was a 30-minute change. But what you're seeing visually, like I see this immediately I say this storm's dying. We're staying on this. I mean, Gene, I would hope you would stay on this too, because this is a fantastic scene to time lapse and photograph. But instantly, this storm is just like, it's dying. So that would be a good thing if you were worried on a tornado outbreak day and you saw a storm like this. This is like, okay, good. This thing is going away. And something to point out too, just want to point this out too, because hey, why not? You can actually see underneath the updraft, there was another very weak supercell, same as this one, just to the north of this one. So you can see it off there in the distance off the dry line. And another thing, like dry line storms, this is very classic to have the blue sky all around them. That's why I love chasing the dry line. I just do. So I'm looking through here to see if there's, here's another one. I just want to point out very quickly, we're not going to spend too much time on this one because I promised everybody 60 to 90 minutes. We're coming up on 70 minutes or so I don't want to spend too much more time, but I'm going to skip over this one. But just a very quick point out, you can actually see here, this updraft's very thin. This is a supercell that was wilting away. Era, Texas. Brett Wright actually chased this day with me, but yeah, this is just small updraft. This thing had gotten a lot thinner versus where it was at earlier. You still see a little bit of precip, but this thing's dead. I mean, like very thinner on the bottom than it is up top. Like there's a million things pointing to this being dead. So anytime you see storms like that, and also just like a couple other visual things, you can see the anvil here is a little bit wispy, that sort of thing. So yeah, I just think when you're looking at storms, the trend is your friend. Always pay attention to what the storms, where was it? Where's it going? Where's it been? That sort of thing. So now I want to talk about this one because this was a very, to this day, I don't think I've seen another storm quite like this one. This one is kind of like the boss battle. Oh, Linda, thanks so much for joining us. As I said at the top, you're always welcome to bounce on and off. This will be on replay, so always. And also ask questions. We're coming up toward the end. I want to answer as many questions as possible. If you have random questions about storm chasing, please ask. We will let you, we will give the floor to folks in a second. But let's go through this one first because I wanted to get this one because this storm was unique. Gene, I know this one. I don't think you were on this one. I want to give you a chance to look at it for a second because this one's a confusing one. Wouldn't you say so? This one's a little bit more confusing than your typical storm visually. It's a very unique looking storm.
Yeah, it would make me wonder if there was some. This is a technical term you haven't addressed here today, but just the way the structure looks would make me wonder if there's some veer in the atmosphere. The rotation is not consistent. It's kind of chaotic. It is strong because you see it pulling all kinds of moisture in along that beaver tail there. But at the same time, the structure of the updraft is chaotic. And that makes me think that there's a place in the wind profile where that gradual turning has been interrupted. The wind has backed off a bit and then resuming its directional change.
Gene, you are a genius. That's exactly what was going on on this day. Just so you know, this is the day before El Reno. So this is the day that almost was right before El Reno. There was a very slight like kink in the wind flow that was kind of that veer back look, which doesn't preclude tornadoes. I do want to point that out. It doesn't preclude tornadoes. There were tornadoes on this day. But had it gone off as forecast, there were supercells from border to border in Oklahoma. Couple of things differently. The El Reno day is kind of like the novel afterthought kind of storm day to this one. This one would have been like the main event tornado outbreak. But because of that very slight difference in the wind, that a little bit backing, it basically, you're, like I said in the wind shear video, you want winds from the south turning to the southwest, west southwest, or even west northwest. That in that turning, there was this place actually where they went from south to southwest, back to south, and then back to southwest, and that can sometimes lead to really funky storm structures. Now, there's a little bit of a play on perspective here. But, let me change the color of that because I don't want to have to go back and do that later. But right here is the area. Right. This is where this is where there was lots of upward motion, some spin, etc. This is the danger zone. That's where it was at right there underneath the updraft there. There's a bit of a trick of perspective here because from here over to here, it looks like it's a line from where we're setting. But I just want to point out that it's more like from the right green arrow here, it's more like this, and then it kind of curves a little bit. So there's actually a gradual curve through this whole thing that's happening. And to prove that out, I want to show, maybe, I do not know if I have a radar image for this. Oh, yes, I do. Oh my goodness, I about fainted. I thought I about to say, I got radar images for all of these so I could show them off. So to show my work, this is a supercell. Oops, right there. So what you're looking at here is, oh, come on, you need to be up at the top layer. There we go. So you can see this is this, I am right about here. I am, here, let me zoom in a little bit. I am right about here, just east of I-35. So this storm, this low level inflow band over here is happening right up here. It's coming in from the forward flank into the updraft. And then you see the RFD, and that's this area right here. You're seeing that, that's that area right there. So there's this curving happening. There's a definite curve in how this looks. Visually, though, this is how perspective can get you in storm chasing oftentimes. It doesn't look like it's curved. It looks like you're almost looking at a shelf. A lot of people would look at this and say, oh, shelf cloud, instant, like this is like a shelfy thing. But it's actually a supercell. This thing is actually rotating. There's actually some rotation kind of, the storm is actually rotating. You can actually see it with these, and that one's actually backwards. It's because it's actually kind of flowing in this way and then flowing in this way. So you can kind of see it like how there's just like the spin, and that's the overall rotation of the storm. The storm is actually spinning like this, like that. So, but I'm going to get rid of that because that's just getting crowded. Same for that one and same for that one. So a couple of things that you want to look for here. First off, this is like looking a little bit linear though, right? And that's because there is another storm back behind it that's reinforcing the outflow. So this is all going to become a very linear thing very quickly after this, actually. We called the chase and ate at Mazzio's in Paul's Valley like 20 minutes after this. Like we followed it for just a little bit and then we left it. It did go tornado warned, which is the story of our life as storm chasers. We're like, oh, this looks terrible. I'm done with it. I'm going to go eat dinner, and then it goes tornado warned. But it actually didn't produce, so it was a good call at the end of the day because the structure was gone by that point. It became pretty mushy. But as earlier, you can kind of see there's a little bit of precip is visible right there in the updraft, which is a problem that you have with those veer back systems sometimes, is you have precip that can fall back through the updraft because of how the shear is oriented. So You can see that happening. You can see the inflow at various areas. This was racing from right to left into the storm. You could see, these different areas just like all just blowing right into it. I have no idea what that arrow is doing down there for, but yeah, again, it's the same thing as we talked about before. If you're looking for tornadoes, this is a very complex looking storm, but downdraft, updraft, tornado area. It's typically like that. Sometimes you can get sometimes the tornado area can be stretched down to like down here on the very south end. That does happen sometimes, but you want to start your tornado investigation where the downdraft and the updraft look to meet, and where there's like RFD wrapping behind it, because that's a good place to look for tornadoes. Obviously, right underneath the updraft base, you get tornadoes under the updraft. The cloud area you see, that is where you get tornadoes. Gene, you got anything else on this one?
Yeah, another point. In this case, that didn't happen, but you can have this kind of a storm with that, veer back veer, that crook in the change of direction with height. But if you have very strong low level shear, you can still get a tornado. And we're unsure as to why that happens, but you can have a storm that looks like this and end up with a tornado because there's enough shear at the low level.
Yeah, and I mean, and a couple of things you can look for visually whenever that is happening would be kind of the shape of the updraft. I actually am a huge fan of when updrafts are kind of bow shaped, like they look kind of like that. I don't know the reason, but it just seems like a lot of supercells that end up with that bowl shape do really great things. Like in terms of like, if you're a storm chaser and you're in open fields and you're looking for tornadoes, if that's like your forecast, those tend to do pretty well. And a couple other things that you want to pay attention to with storms for tornadoes would be like these fingers, like those fingers down there. Those, like if you're seeing a lot of rapid rising motion, I've mentioned it earlier, but that rapid rising motion is a huge precursor to tornadoes. Because with the outflow, you'll see a bunch of chaotic motion, but it won't be rapid rising, like persistently increasing, all that things like persistence, the rapid rising motion, all those things right there at the updraft, downdraft interface kind of thing. Because what will happen oftentimes, and I didn't do it with this lesson. Whoops, I have no idea what's going on over there on the right-hand side where I'm controlling the entire stream. No big deal. And this is another just fantastic supercell. I'm trying to see if I got an example of this. I don't think I had an example of this. We'll run with this one, though. Oftentimes what will happen is chasers are looking here, updraft, downdraft interface, there's your wall cloud. But then there's low-hanging things on even bigger storms, bigger updraft bases, way off here to the south. This is much simpler than that. This is a simplified, smaller version, but you have what is the RFD gust front, that there's outflow surging on the south end of supercells. So you have that chaotic motion. You have the rolling motion, and it looks like rotation, and people will get entranced by these lowerings just like miles to the south of the actual danger area. So just be aware that there's always probably something happening there. Best to keep an eye on stuff, because every now and then that's actually a new updraft going up, and then the KD Oklahoma EF4 forms on it very quickly. So those things do happen. But go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Another thing that happens, and it happened to me as I began chasing, is that because that area you're talking about is so active, it can draw your attention, and then you end up looking at that instead of the actual business end of the storm.
It's so true. And now, granted, and I'm going to pull us back off on the full screen here. So we're going to start I'm going to answer some questions here as we go through stuff here in a second. But on a supercell, you have that hook echo. And actually, I lied. I'm going to go back here because I want to show this actually. Wrong window. zooming in the wrong window. Here we go. So on supercells, you will have oftentimes, you have this hook echo here, and you'll have the anticyclonic rotation on this side. But on this side, you'll have cyclonic rotation. So you can oftentimes get twins because of that. I have a really great case study example of this from this year in New Mexico on a video coming up on the YouTube channel, where you can actually see this happening, the counterclockwise on the north end and the clockwise on the south end. So just so you know that despite what I said on the RFD gust front, you can actually get the clockwise rotation down there too. So, you got to pay attention. Storms are dynamic, but usually the business end is going to be right up in here somewhere. It's going to be up in there in that updraft, downdraft interface area. So with that said, let me see. Roy asks, why can't you use radar sweeps from different levels to create a three-dimension model of various storms? Roy, actually, the answer to that is very simple. They actually do. That it's not as high resolution as it needs to be for science and such. I know scientists are like improving on that immensely, but actually, I know Radar Omega features a 3D option, and several other radar apps do. You can actually model storms in 3D, and you can do things like see how high tornado damage signatures and such are. So let's see. I'm looking through some comments. Mark asks, what are the dynamics that make so many tornadoes in winter? Mark, actually, this is strangely a very simple question or answer to the question. And it's actually tornadoes can happen anytime the ingredients are in place for tornadoes, which sounds awfully simplistic, but it's true. And in the case of winter, the jet stream is strongest in winter when the temperature difference between the poles and the equator is greatest in the northern hemisphere. So the jet stream tends to be stronger. So the wind shear typically is stronger. So all you need in the winter oftentimes is that warm, moist air. And it's pretty easy to come by in the south a lot of times, especially right now as we're running, a decade now or more of the Gulf being perpetually warmer than normal. So that's something that you would so it's that simple. It really is. It's and nighttime tornadoes, Mark, same thing. What happens in the plains is you have the EML, elevated mix layer, which is the cap, which is that warm, dry air aloft, which is advected over. It's moved over the plains. It's setting above the surface, and that at night causes storms to die. Now, out in the south, Alabama, Mississippi, you don't really have that. So those storms are still able to go. The surface layer is free to do its thing. So basically, the reason why that happens is there's no cap typically, or as not as pronounced in the south typically. So that's why you get a lot of nighttime tornadoes. So, and let's see. And to point that out, actually, Gene, what do you think about that too, by the way, while I pull up something else?
It's just the winter systems, because of that temperature differential are just so much more dynamic. They have so much more energy. And if you have the warm air and the instability, it'll happen. Even further north in the south, fortunately, she had very little or no damage, but my sister up in Aurora, Nebraska last year in December got hit by a tornado in December. Her house took a direct hit. Fortunately, very little damage. It was weak by the time it came into the southwest side of the city there. They can happen anytime, anywhere that the ingredients are there. The time of year, tornado doesn't care.
Yeah. Exactly. And just to point out, if you're watching this and you are unaware, starting on Monday night in Oklahoma from roughly I-44 and then southeast, there's going to be a cold front crashing. I posted about this earlier today on our Facebook page. Cold front's going to be crashing overnight. You're going to have storms start firing up. That's the start of what is going to be the much bigger portion of the event on Tuesday, probably somewhere along the Mississippi Valley. Honestly, I wish I could give you a full-fledged forecast, but it's like 4 or 5 days ahead of time, and I haven't really looked at it at this point, honestly. But that is real. So if you're watching this, make sure your friends in those areas know. One of the best things we can do as weather enthusiasts at this point is to spread the word with good, reliable, accurate weather information, because that allows people to then prepare and take appropriate action. And Mark said, so the shear is a bigger deal with the South in winter. I would agree with that. And I would actually +1. Gene, you can correct me if you think differently, but I think the shear is the big deal anytime. I mean, like, you give me the low level shear, you don't need that much instability to produce like tornadoes or big time storm structure. You just need wind shear, like the good stuff, like that really good turning stuff.
What, just a few years ago, that case in Indiana with was it November storms with tornadoes? Those storms didn't even have any lightning in them.
Yeah.
They were largely produced by shear.
Yeah, November 16, 2015, Texas Panhandle. Amazing tornado storm chase. Very little damage. There was some damage, which was unfortunate. But in terms of like the meteorology, there was so little lightning that night. So little instability, so little lightning. There was a moment where it was like, I could see like I thought was a tornado in the distance. Like I knew there was a supercell out there, but there was no lightning, so it was very creepy. And I was like, that looks like it. Maybe it is. And I turned to Brett and I say, I think there's a tornado. I don't know. And we were just like, he was like, no, I don't think so. And then maybe about 2 minutes later, big power flash and just lit up the funnel. So yeah, you don't. That was a lot to say. Instability, it's nice to have, and I think it contributes to like big time structure, to be sure. But I think that like wind shear is like the thing. If I'm looking for anything forecast wise, that's what I'm looking at. So, and Janice asked, we get this question a lot. Actually, do you think Tornado Alley is moving to Dixie Alley? She's in Oklahoma. The thing I always say with this is that scientists are showing study after study after study that tornado environments are increasing in the Mississippi Valley, in the South, et cetera, versus where they were, the last few decades, for sure. And they're slightly decreasing on the plains. It's a slight decrease. I think it'll play out a lot of how it has the last decade, where the plains are still going to be pretty active a lot of years, if not most years. But the South is also going to be pretty active. So I always say, I don't think Tornadoes Alley is shifting. I just think that in another decade or so, we're probably almost certainly going to be talking about Tornado Alley, including Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, all those. I just think that's probably how we'll be talking about it. We won't be saying Oklahoma's not Tornado Alley anymore. We'll just be saying, Tornado Alley, actually, once you cross the Rockies and, you drive until you hit some more mountains out there about the Appalachians, that's Tornado Alley. I think that's how we're going to be talking about it.
Well, you know the answer to this question, Rachel, probably. Which state has the most tornadoes per square mile?
Oh, yeah. Actually, Gene, you're giving away all my future videos, because that's actually a video I just did recorded last weekend. It'll be out.
Okay. It's a surprise.
No, it's not a surprise. It is actually Kansas. But when you...
it's Florida.
Yeah. It depends on which study.
Outside of Tornado Alley.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, it's Florida.
Yeah, outside of Tornado Alley, it's Florida. Actually, if you look at per square miles... Kansas tends to be at the top. Then you have Florida, but it gets pretty weird after that. You have Maryland, you have Illinois. It's very different. It's not what you would think in terms of tornado density, and it's actually those are like multi-decade studies. Those are the numbers. Those aren't like just the last 10 years. Those are like since 1950. So all that to say, Tornado Alley not really shifting. I just think awareness and numbers are increasing to the east, but I think it's just going to be kind of a universal awareness that there some areas were always Tornado Alley. There's that meme like I don't know, I don't even know, but there's a meme something like always was or something like that. That's how people are going to be referencing Mississippi and Alabama. Would less instability and more shear affect the hail situation too? Mark, that's a great question. Friend of the channel, friend of the Titans, Cameron Nixon, is doing. And by the way, if you haven't done so, check out his videos on our channel. He's got two. And not to put this on you, Cameron, if you are watching or if this gets back to you, but you have promised to finish the trilogy at some point. So we're going to do it eventually. We've got a couple of ideas going around. But he has worked on some really cool hail stuff. Basically, what he has found is that big hail happens whenever you have a lot of shear between, I think it's 1 kilometer and 6 kilometers. That hodograft is like stretched out in that area, and there's not much shear 0 to 1. That's big hail. Like not much low level shear, a lot of shear in the mid levels. Big hail situation. That's going to favor big hail as long as there's instability. But he has found actually that the instability number does not really affect hail potential, big hail potential. And I've seen that play out my whole chase career, like 6,000 Cape, and we're getting like golf ball size hail on the radar. And then like 3 weeks ago, there was 2,500 Cape and the storm was dropping baseballs. And even anecdotally, it hasn't played out where instability really affects hail size. And he's starting to actually differentiate those environments in such a way. I think we're coming to an answer what actually would mean big hail. So it's really exciting. So really exciting subject. And that's Good point there by Joe and Janice. What area has the most strong tornadoes? Gene, do you know that answer?
Dixie Alley, I think.
It's actually, Gene.
Am I wrong on that? I thought.
No, you're partially right. You're very partially right, actually. A couple of things. First off, tornadoes and strong tornadoes have a population bias. This sounds obvious, but where there are people and tornadoes hit stuff, tornadoes are rated by damage. So when they hit stuff, they're more likely to be rated strong. So there is an eastern bias and a south and eastern bias to strong tornadoes.
Yeah.
With that said, the area that gets the most strong tornadoes actually would be that Mississippi and Alabama area, and then draw like a straight line from Birmingham back to Oklahoma City, Wichita, and that area gets the most strong tornadoes, typically violent tornadoes especially. But almost every state east of the Rockies has seen a violent tornado at this point, like EF4, EF5. Even Wyoming, although Wyoming's violent EF4 tornado was in the weirdest possible spot. It was the Tetons, up in Tetons in Yellowstone, which is my seminal answer to this hill is going to protect me from a tornado. When you live in Oklahoma and that hill's 1,000 foot tall, there was an EF4 that crossed mountain ranges in Wyoming. That's not going to help you. I'm sorry. It's just not.
Well, that population bias is important because Rachel and I have both seen very, very strong tornadoes in the Texas Panhandle that hit nothing, and as a result, were rated EF0. But if they had hit a populated area, they'd have been EF3, EF4.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually been studies, and this is not to scare anybody, and I'm talking like we're a little bit over time here, so I apologize for that. But we are finding out, science is finding out actually that most tornadoes actually are capable of strong to violent damage. Like they have those types of winds in them. It's just a matter of timing, when they hit something, the strength of the building. So what science is finding is that many tornadoes, if not most, are very strong. When it comes to their ratings, the EF scale is an amazing scale for what it does. They're continually improving it, but it's also any scale for tornadoes based on damage. Any scale for tornado period is going to be like unreliable. Just know that most tornadoes are capable of producing some really severe damage. I mean, it's just a one way to look at it for sure. So Gene, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off here for the night?
Yeah, windstorm chase season. We're just going into winter, and I've got super cell deprivation syndrome very bad.
Yeah, I'm gonna be struggling for the next few months for sure. That's for sure. So that's why I'm gonna do more of these streams. And Gene can join me, and Brett can join me. Maybe we can get the Brandons away from the babies to join us at some point too, and talk weather. I'm going to hopefully get a few special guests on too. So we're going to do a lot of cool stuff on the channel for the next few months to kind of do education. I've talked about I want to expand Titan U. I want to actually double its size in the next year or so. And we're going to do it. It's stuff like this. Like, technically, I'm cheating. This is a 2-hour or hour and a half, 45-minute video. It's Titan U technically, so I'm technically cheating. But we're doing interactive stuff too. And 2 plugs right now. 2 very important plugs. Right now, if you are still watching, thank you so much for sticking with us and learning. All the images and a couple of extra ones are going to be sent out tomorrow to our newsletter subscribers. So go on to our newsletter, that link I just posted in the chat, sign up, you will get that. And you also get alerts for our newest YouTube videos, because we do all kinds of stuff. I do all kinds of stuff. I can be a little wild sometimes on the YouTube channel. And then also, live storm chasing is coming next year, and I cannot wait. I know a lot of other people have done live storm chasing, but I just want to plug that I am really excited about some of the stuff that I have planned for this year. Just a brief overview. I just want to talk about it for like 2 minutes because I'm excited. I can't not. So I've always said, if I'm going to do live storm chase streams, there's going to be 2 things I have to be able to do. I have to be able to take people everywhere. I do not want to have people sitting in the car, looking out the windshield while there's a tornado happening over here. You're going to be going everywhere. There's going to be a camera going everywhere with us. You're going to see the whole thing. It's going to be a thing. You're not going to miss stuff because you're sitting in the car. It's like, that's the worst place to be. Everybody gets out of the car and looks at the storm, and you're just sitting in there in the silence. That's that I've always hated that about storm chase streams. And another thing, I always wanted to be able to make them educational. We're going to be able to do things like throw up videos. I'm going to be able to say, hey, we're looking at this. Take a look at this, and I'm going to be able to pull up a Titan U video, and you're going to be able to watch it. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be educational, interactive, and it's going to be not just in the car. So I'm looking forward to that. So with all that said, thanks for joining us tonight. Gene, thank you so much for jumping on. You saved my hide because you've allowed me to not have to talk for 2 hours. And thank you everybody for being here, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Hi everyone. So I've gotten a lot of requests to do a morning forecast routine walkthrough, and I honestly don't know how I'd even do that. I mean, I don't know. So the reason for that is my routine isn't a routine. I don't even have a set number of items I look at. Literally, some days I look at every possible value. I break down everything in the atmosphere. And some days I only need to look at 1 or 2 things to chase effectively. So instead of lying and going through a routine that doesn't exist, I'm going to spend a bit of time going over my 10 favorite things to look at for hunting supercells and tornadoes on the plains when it comes to weather models. Now, these may be applicable to other areas, but I'm focusing mainly on the plains since that's what I forecast and chase. So with that said, let's dive right in. Okay, first thing I look at is reflectivity and updraft helicity. I like combining these. This is an obvious one. The key with reflectivity and updraft helicity model charts is to never take them literally, but take them seriously, especially when you average them out over multiple runs of the same model. Now, this is a skill you have to really work at, as you have to have an open mind to possibility, and you have to know how to blend solutions together. You also have to take into account the limitations of models today. They're not going to be 100% accurate. They're not going to model the atmosphere 100% perfectly because they don't have one-to-one resolution. So when looking at reflectivity charts, you can't take these literally, as they literally aren't showing you what a perfect representation of the atmosphere. What they do show you, what this reflectivity and updraft helicity chart shows you, is pretty good though, and you should take it seriously. Finally, a quick note on updraft helicity. The updraft helicity swaths, there are a recent trend amongst chasers to use these, get really excited about tornado potential when you see them. I can't go there. I can get behind their usage in at least determining storm mode. I'm not sold on extreme updraft to listy swaths, meaning tornadoes. That method has failed a lot. You see it on social media all the time. But if there are clearly defined streaks consistently over the same areas over multiple runs, that at least signifies local supercell potential is much higher in that area. I also look at model reflectivity maps mentally as a collection of 100-mile bubbles. By that I mean I know if I'm in the area of a storm and it's within 100 miles of me to the west, it can be pretty easy to get on that storm. So if there's a clustering of solutions with supercells in a specific area, I tend to let radar and satellite do the rest and keep things more general. One day we'll have a consistent way to tell right down to the county and town where storms are going to go, but today isn't that day. Second thing, dew points and wind barbs. I love these maps, they're important. I'm a huge person when it comes to dew points. They're one of the most important ingredients for severe storms on the plains. I'm going to treat this as if you are completely clueless on what constitutes good dew points on the plains. For the lower plains, and I'm talking about the area from central Nebraska down to North Texas, this includes Kansas and Oklahoma, anything above 65 is considered pretty good. 70s are excellent. 60 to 65, workable but not ideal, and anything below 60, you have to have a lot of caveats to make it work. Now, west, on the higher plains, this is thinking like the Texas Panhandle, New Mexico, East Colorado, far west Kansas, Wyoming, West Nebraska, you don't need as much moisture to have greatness. Anything above 60 is really good out there, and 55 to 60 is pretty solid, especially if the shear is in place, and it's not too hot. A couple caveats there, but 55-60 can work quite a bit. 50 to 55, it's conditionally workable depending on a few other factors, mainly those ones I just said. You need to have those lower LCLs in really good shear, and anything below 50, I'm pretty much checking out on the higher plains. Third thing, 500 millibar winds. These are the winds in the middle levels of the atmosphere. If you want good vented updrafts, you gotta have some good 500 millibar flow. Anything 30 to 35 knots, depending on the environmental conditions otherwise, probably gonna get you there. Anything over 40 is ideal, and my excitement personally peaks about 55 to 60. Anything above those though, and we're going to start seeing storm movement, those speeds, those forward speeds get unworkable because the winds are pushing storms along too quickly. So just keep that in mind. Also, the ideal direction of 500 millibar winds to me is west to west-southwest. Okay, fourth thing, 850 millibar winds. You want big tornadoes? Then you need south to southeast 850 millibar winds at 30 knots or higher. The biggest tornado days on the plains, they happen with south to southeast winds at 850 millibars at 40 knots or higher. If these are present, I get really excited about tornado potential during a day. Now for that fifth metric, 700 millibar temperatures. The 700 millibar temperature is a key metric to determining cap strength on the plains and also how much existing storms may struggle to realize their full potential. On that, I mean, if a storm is struggling against the cap, even though it's still up, it's not going to act like a storm taking advantage of the full environment. So it's going to struggle. That's why in some environments you see some storms produce tornadoes, some don't. It could be because of that, the fact that some storms are still struggling with that cap and not fully taking advantage of ingredients. There's a lot of local variation, even in tornado outbreak scenarios, so just keep that in mind. The general rule on 700 millibar temps is that anything over 12 degrees Celsius is a pretty stout cap. 10 to 12 degrees is workable and perhaps ideal. As you get temps too cool at 700 millibars, so anything below that 10 degrees Celsius, you could get too many storms if the forcing's, pretty reasonable. Now, I gotta issue a caveat here. There are many other ways to measure cap strength, and they are more effective when they're all used together. But I tend to worry about the 700 layer a lot, and given that I'm limiting myself to 10 model charts in this video, this is going to have to do. However, we're going to have a full video on the cap soon, so be on the lookout for that. Number 6, ML Cape. I've talked about Cape a lot in multiple other videos. You can check those out on our channel. I got one from the SKUT videos, I got one from a chase forecasting tutorial, so just search through for Cape, you're going to find them. ML Cape is a measurement of instability in the atmosphere. I personally favor ML Cape over all others because it's more representative of what a storm is actually ingesting parcel-wise. There have been multiple times I've seen storms in a 6,000 SB Cape environment act like 2,000 Cape storms because ML Cape was actually down in that range. As with the rest of the values, let's pretend that none of what I just said made sense and let's explain it. Anything over 1000 ML Cape is conditionally favorable for severe weather in my opinion. You can get severe weather under 1000 for sure, but we're talking about the plains. I think 1000 is kind of the cutoff. I've seen plenty of tornadoes in low Cape high shear environments, which tend to cluster in that 1000 to 1500 ML Cape line. Cape is not a measurement of if storms will form, so keep that in mind. Or put another way, Cape doesn't determine if your engine actually works, it's just the amount of fuel you can use if your engine can actually start. 2000 ML Cape or higher is pretty supportive of big severe weather, with more extreme readings in that 3000, 4000 ML Cape and above, offering more potent environments which require less shear to make really, really spinny things happen. As a general rule, the less Cape you have, the more shear you're going to need to get a storm to produce tornadoes, and vice versa. If you have extreme Cape, sometimes very weak shear can become very interesting in a hurry. Next up on our list, LCL heights. Now when it comes to tornadoes, you have to know if cloud bases are going to be low enough to make them happen. For instance, if you have an environment with extreme wind shear and ML Cape at 3000, but your LCL heights are at 2500, then you're almost certainly not going to get tornadoes. But you can expect some pretty amazing well-structured high-base supercells. LCL heights are another indice, which I think there is a happy medium to work for, with heights at 1000 to 1500 being the most ideal for storm chasing. Anything above 1500 becomes a lot harder to get tornadoes, and anything above 2000 is basically saying tornadoes are unlikely. Tornadoes are more likely with LCLs below 1000, but the chasing may not be as good. Now, typically low LCL environments are going to be characterized by faster moving, moderate instability, or lower storms. While there's something to be said about being guaranteed a tornado because as the LCL heights lower, your tornado odds do go up, these storms typically don't look as good for the camera and are usually a bit tougher to chase since you'll have to be closer to see the cloud bases of storms. I personally just happen to favor that happy medium if I had a choice. Okay, next up, 0 to 1 kilometer SRH. This one stands for Storm Relative Helicity. When looking for tornadoes, I tend to favor shear over instability on my depth chart. The first shear parameter I look at is 0 to 1 kilometer SRH. Anything over 100 on this chart is considered favorable for tornadic supercells. Anything above 100 is good with increasingly good environments as you go up from there. There are no clear cutoffs when it comes to SRH though, so if all other factors appear very favorable but the 0 to 1 kilometer SRH is only 80, I wouldn't give up hope just yet. And number 9, 0 to 6 kilometers shear. I look at the overall shear of an environment as well to determine if supercells are possible or not by looking at the 0 to 6 kilometer shear value chart. This measures the change in wind from the surface to 6 kilometers up in the atmosphere. And the more you have, the more organized storms are going to be. For 0 to 6 kilometer shear, anything above 30 knots I consider pretty solid for supercells. My preferences are anything above 35 to 40 knots. The biggest tornado days see bulk shear in the 40 plus range typically, with the average of these big tornado days actually being closer to 50 knots. Keep that in mind. Last, number 10, supercell composite. I like this parameter a lot for determining if the environment is indeed highly supportive of supercells. Now, if you've already checked off all the other boxes above, you already know this is a supercell day. But this is a final shortcut solution to kind of digging into the atmosphere and perhaps seeing where all these ingredients line up on a single map a little quicker. Supercell composite takes into account effective storm relative helicity, MU Cape, and the effective bulk wind difference, or more simply, 2 shear values and 1 instability value. There aren't huge cutoffs to when significant tornado events are more likely with supercell composite parameters, so just think generally the bigger the value, the more likely big supercells are to happen. For instance, A supercell composite of 11 signifies an environment more supportive of severe weather than 3, but this is largely dependent upon storm mode processes that you need to be paying attention to. So, that was a lot. There are of course many other options to look at when it comes to forecasting. I only gave 10, so do me a favor. Let me know if there's anything I didn't list you would favor more in the comments. We're all about sharing information here. Also, be sure to check us out on social media. Also, you should hit that subscribe button too. We'll see you next time.